So now that we've begun our recording, welcome. Hello. This is the monthly speaker series of the Coincidence Project. We are a nonprofit. We work across the globe, and we are based in the US, in America, but we have partners and board members and attendees from all over, every continent. We'd love to hear where you're from tonight. If you want to post in the chat where you're joining us from, let us know where you are zooming in from now. And I'll turn it over in just a moment here to our colleague, Sky Nelson Isaacs. He has been with us from the very beginning of starting to conceptualize the Coincidence Project. He was one of our earliest Coincidence allies and has appeared a number of times on our founder, Bernard Beitman's podcast, Connecting with Coincidence. I think, Sky, as of a year ago, you held the record as the person who had been interviewed the most times by Bernie on the show. He had you on 4 times as of a year ago. I don't know if anybody else has tied you at being on 4 times yet or not. But obviously there's a lot of great things that you have to share, and you keep putting out wonderful books and other work, and Bernie keeps bringing you back just for that, and we're delighted to bring you here on the Coincidence Project to be our guest speaker in our speaker series. So with that, I turn it over to you.
Okay. I'm going to take a deep breath. You can hear me okay on the microphone? Okay, fantastic. I'm so happy to be here. I really am. And today we're going to talk about synchronicity, wholeness, and flow from a scientific perspective. My background is as a physicist, and I love to study the basics of space and time and how they maybe support a worldview in which synchronicity is natural. And I'm going to turn off my device so it doesn't buzz. There we go. So a worldview in which synchronicity is a natural part of our physics is my goal. And there's a lot to say. So the title of today's topic with the Coincidence Project is The Science of Wholeness, Synchronicity, and Flow. I started the Synchronicity Institute in 2019. And we do research and training, research in fundamental physics, quantum foundations, and quantum information science. And we write books and train folks on how to live more in the experience of flow, how to notice synchronicities in front of you when they happen. We're going to talk about that specifically today. So you get an overview of the ideas and some practice. We're going to try and leave time for an exercise towards the end. So welcome. I invite you to take a deep breath with me if you want, as I settle into being the lead head here on the screen. So this is a new diagram in the background here that I'm going to show a little bit about. It's, as Jennifer, my colleague, said to me today, I said, the presentation isn't totally accurate in every possible way, but she said, synchronicity is a field in development, right? So there's ideas that are coming out to the forefront all the time. And this tree that you see here is a very, very new idea that came from years of wrestling with these subjects and finding good ways to try and explain them. And then some inspiration in a dream, this image came. And then I worked with a friend named Kinan, who helped me use AI to generate this image of the tree that circles back on itself. So it grows up into many possible branches of the world and then circles back into the roots, replenishing itself in the next moment of time. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but it's just a little foreshadowing for the synchronicity tree. And I want to give you an overview. Again, we're not going to get to all of this today, but this is like why I think it's important, right? Synchronicity is not just funny things to mark in your calendar, like, oh, on this day I ran into so-and-so at the airport. Synchronicity is a theory of time. It's a feedback system. It's a way in which we get feedback from living in the universe. Synchronicity is a theory of interactions. Every interaction reflects your filters, how you see your experiences. That's going to affect how you interpret your experiences and how you choose to respond to them, which is going to bring about the next synchronicity. So there's a chain of interactions, synchronistic interactions. It has to do with how you actually perceive the specifics of your world from the whole of what's, really happening out there, whatever that means. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And I foresee this as a revolution in the way that we think. And the way that I sort of ground that is these three topics: detangling confusing conversations, noticing the repeating conversations that come up in our lives and how to get clarity on what they mean for us, and in our collective as well. Fixing feedback loops. I think I'm noticing in my life a lot of mistaken feedback that, I do things that I think are good and I don't get good feedback, and I do things that I think are bad and I get positive feedback. And in the world, we have systems that don't function to enhance the actually intended outcome of what we want to create, whether it's our government or our economy. We're not necessarily reinforcing the outcomes that we want. So fixing those broken feedback loops through synchronicity, and reconnecting action with outcome. So when we take an action in our lives and we don't see that it's connected in a meaningful way to some kind of response from the universe, then we disempower ourselves from seeing how our choices are actually influencing our path. And a definition that you'll see in a moment of synchronicity is exactly making that connection between our choices and the outcomes. So Carl Jung's definition of synchronicity is a meaningful coincidence or a causal connection. And that's really the name of the Coincidence Project. That's a good definition. Syn means with or together. Chronos means clock-oriented time. And icity is a quality or condition. So together, this means the quality of a moment in which things fall into place together in a meaningful way, a meaningful coincidence. My definition is a little more, maybe more or less specific, a little different, but it's not counter. It's this. It's a responsive cosmos. Synchronicity is a responsiveness to the cosmos. If you see the cosmos as a whole system, then when you prod it in one place, you might get a response in another place. So you go looking for a good movie to go see on a Friday night. You end up getting called to your friend's house because they need help with their personal life. And you don't see the movie, but you get this great connection with a friend, which is what you were seeking in the first place anyway. So you put an effort out in one direction, get a response in a different direction. That's a synchronicity. That's a responsive cosmos. And we could say events that are not causally related to us, but reflect our personal world. So if I'm going to see a movie and that's my intention, and I get redirected towards hanging out with a friend and supporting them, that didn't come as a result of me choosing to go to the movies, but it does seem related to the fact that I wanted to connect and be out there, having a nice, meaningful evening. So it's when there's not a physical connection between the action and the response, but there's some kind of meaningful connection. Again, that aligns with Carl Jung's definition quite well, but is a little more maybe physical, something I can define physically through physics. That's the idea. So there's three questions we're going to ask tonight that I think are important. Number one, how could synchronicity happen in our current physical world? Number two, why would synchronicity happen? Even if synchronicities are possible, even if the universe is able to respond to our choices, why would it? Why would a meaningful result come through, not a random result? And finally, how do we recognize synchronicity and experience more flow, feel more flow in our lives? That's the feet on the ground question. So the first thing I want to go into is this idea of how synchronicity can unfold. Again, if I have an intention of going to the movies with a friend and that's what I'm planning, and a different friend calls me up and says, I need your help with something, going on in my life. Can you come over? And you're like, I'm not sure. I got these plans already. And then your first person cancels on you. It's like there's this web of connection, of causality, but it's not actually causal. And there's a sense in which the histories adjust. What I mean by that is like the person that cancels on you allows you to be able to go take care of your other friend. So there's a sense in which the universe as a whole is adjusting and changing its status in order to help us align with our intended future. How does that adjustment happen? How do we modify the past in order to match our intentions? Well, this idea of retroactive determination is the how, okay? So imagine light traveling from the sun towards Earth. And it travels sort of like this. It doesn't necessarily travel in one path, but it branches into many possibilities. This is an aspect of the quantum nature of light. Nothing controversial here. And at the end, one of those branches meets Earth and the other branches miss Earth. So now, if you see the light, if it hits your eyes, it traveled on a specific path, right? Because if it misses the Earth, it's not going to hit your eyes. So retroactively, that is the path that the light traveled because you see it. But that's all retroactive. It's actually an 8-minute period. There's 8 minutes of time there that the light was traveling that is retroactively defined. Up until that point, the light could have gone any direction. And by you measuring it at the Earth, at the end point, it actually defines the whole previous 8 minutes. Imagine that in your life. When you bump into somebody at the store, you're defining their previous 8 minutes that allowed them to get to you at the store. That's the analogy I want to create here. So there's this flexibility that the path of a system has to how it's measured at the end point. And this is true in our language as well. It's called contextuality. If you think of this question, the old train, this statement, the old train, you picture maybe a locomotive. The old train left the station. You picture this old locomotive trying to pull out of a train station. But if I change it on you and I say the old train, the young, you're a little bit discombobulated because the beginning of the sentence actually changes meaning. The old, the elders train or educate the youth. So you see how the way the sentence ends defines what the beginning meant in the past. So how we end the sentence changes in some sense or defines retroactively what the beginning intended to mean. And it's the same with our interactions with the world. This is a theory of time, a theory of interactions, where our actions at a given moment affect the history that led to that moment of the world around us. The meaning of our environment and this configuration of the situations around us is affected or changes retroactively through our choices. And that's the how. How can the world be responsive to us? How can it adjust to our actual meaningful inner experience? It does so through this adjustment of history, as long as it's unobserved, as long as the light is unobserved or the language is not defined yet, as long as the person's path is not known to you, then they can be anywhere as long as they end up meeting you at the endpoint. So that's the idea of retroactive determination. And we say the end determines the beginning. Local ambiguity this is a term from language, from syntax, local ambiguity. It's not clear in the moment what the thing means, but once the whole sentence is complete, then you know. And how many of you do voice typing on your phone, right? For me, it's like constantly using the voice typing software. And sometimes it adjusts what was just said based upon what's said next in order to adapt to the future or what's now the present. Again, it's the same idea for us as we go through our lives. Synchronicity can unfold because what we choose to do now, going to the store, can adjust someone else's path to get to us in that moment. So I'll just tell a quick story to illustrate. In college, I took a year off to go to Europe, and I had a good friend, Dana, who took a year to study, go to school in Israel. And we were young and thought, well, we should meet. As long as we're both kind of in that part of across the Atlantic, let's just try and meet. We didn't have any real plan though, and we didn't have cell phones at the time. Barely had email. So we made this plan to meet in Greece. And I was traveling through Spain and stuff like that. So Greece was kind of midway for both of us. And anyway, I'm traveling through Spain and up to Italy, and I realize I'm too sick to continue traveling. So I get on a ticket to go home and fly back to California. And my ticket is through Paris because that's where I just had to change the date. So I was fixed on Paris. The universe knew that, right? Because I had the Paris ticket to begin with. So the universe sort of was conspiring in some senses, as you'll see. So I had to head back to Paris from Rome. And I didn't call Dana because I didn't have a phone. And it was too hard to pay for a payphone. They actually had them on the street corners at that time. And so she doesn't hear from me that I'm going to Paris. Meanwhile, she gets an invitation from her friends in the dorm to go to Paris for the weekend. And she says, no, because she's got to wait for me to call. And, I'm traveling from payphones and stuff. So if she misses it, it's done. So she says no to them. But at the last minute, she just, again, this is like foreshadowing. She has a filter on, right? Like I should be here for my friend Sky. No, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to do what's fun for me. And she talked to her mom, and her mom said, forget about the guy. Go to Paris with your friends. So she did that. She gets on a plane to go to Paris. And I've got 48 hours in Paris before my plane takes off. And I go to the Louvre Museum. I walk in this room in the middle of the day, and there's this person that looks just like Dana. And I'm just like, been traveling for 2 months. So I look disheveled, and I'm just staring at her across the room. And her friend looks at her and says, there's this weird guy staring at you. And she says, that's my friend. That's Sky. So how did that happen? It's a miracle. And it's a miracle not just because I met somebody by accident, but I intended to meet her in Greece. And somehow we both got redirected to Paris. I mean, I've calculated that, and it's unrealistic to think that could just be random chance, And what's more, she's my soulmate. We're married now. And that wasn't even the beginning of our relationship. We still didn't get together in a relationship for another few years, but it was a key defining moment in our connection. So how did I go make my choices freely to go here to Paris, and she made her free choices, which also aligned to go to Paris without any kind of conspiracy between us? The universe must have been conspiring with the synchronicity. And the way I see it, an example is my choice to go to Paris put me on a timeline in which she also went to Paris, right? There's this flexibility because she had many possible timelines from my perspective. That's a really key idea here, is that all of this is defined from a specific perspective. So from my perspective, I make my free choices, and she ends up being in my life, adjusting to me. And that's not how it is usually in our own minds. But from her perspective, it's the same thing. I have to let go of all my knowledge of who I am and what I'm doing, jump into her world and say, well, for her, she made a choice to do what she thought was right for her and for the world, for everybody, but from her perspective. And she got on the plane to Paris. And it turns out I was redirected there in her world as well. So we're not controlling each other. We're not making choices that pull other people into our world. We're choosing between a plethora of branches of possibility. And I have those branches here. We have these branches spread out ahead of us. And as we make choices, we end up on different possibilities. And everybody else is in different possibilities too. And those possibilities evolve with our choices, and they include others. And from another person's point of view, this tree would look totally different. So there's this sense in which all of this is consciousness-based. It's perspective-based. It's subjective. The entire universe around us is subjective. In fact, there's two principles that you need to recreate an objective seeming world. And this is what's done in video games to some extent. You need relationality, the sense in which a world is defined relative to me, and a separate world is defined relative to you. And in a video game, they do this where you're playing your game and somebody else across the world is playing their game. And you each think you're in an objective world, but actually it's your computer is generating the images. And then when you meet up, so there's this relational aspect, everything's subjective for you. But when you meet someone in that world, there's consistency between your worlds. There's your world and what you see, there's their world and what they see, and the computers make sure to calculate those similarly so that they align. You agree that there's a cup over there and a door over there. You can interact in the world as if it's objective. And I suggest that that's exactly what happens in our actual world. There's this sense of relationality or subjectivity and a sense of consistency. So everything lines up. But there's no such thing as objective definiteness. There's nothing objective that we can point to say, that's what's really happening. No, we say, that's what's really happening for me. And you would say, that's what's really happening for you. And when we meet up, our realities have to overlap and align somehow. So there's no sense in which I'm controlling Dana's outcome or choices, and there's no sense in which she's intending through some psychic influence to control mine. But we are both inhabiting in this multiverse of possibilities and ending up in the same timeline together. So I say this word timeline. That's really what comes out of this notion of time. The theory of time is time as a line, like as a film strip. You're going through your life in this moment. You feel like you're in a specific moment, but I want you to think about your life as a series of stretches of pathway. It's like fence posts. At any given moment, you're observing the world in a certain state, your life as it is right now. It's a fence post. The next fence post, let's say you interact with your partner or your friend, and you don't talk to them for a while. You don't know where they are. They're evolving into many possibilities. That's the rails in between the fence posts. And that's the time, the pregnant pause in which the world is able to surprise us. All sorts of things are able to evolve out of the emptiness of that possibility space along the rails in between the posts. And then at the next post, you interact with that person again, and you get some surprise. Oh, they're with a friend of yours, or they met you where you didn't plan to be, or some synchronicity can unfold from all the possibilities in between the fence posts. The fence posts are your observations of the world. There's one, and then there's another time a little bit later when you observe the same person again. And in between, there's possibility, there's potentiality. So think about your path as a extension of time, not just a moment in time, but an extension in time. And the choices you make are branching points along that extension of time, where you choose one path or a different path. And this is how synchronicity can respond to us. These timelines are flexible and retroactive. So when we make a choice, we affect the entire timeline behind us, and things can fall into place. So that's how. Okay, now we want to ask why. Why would the universe conspire in our favor, or does it conspire in our favor? I don't really know, but I know that it's meaningful. Let's come back to this picture. So on this tree, you see that there's also apples. And I call this meaningful history selection. That's the second principle. First principle was retroactive determination. This principle is meaningful selection. When we take an action in our lives, we set an intention, we have an expectation, we have anticipation of some kind of qualitative experience, some kind of feeling we want to have. Not this specific outcome, not the kind of dinner we want to eat or the kind of person we want to marry, but the intention of the experience, what we're going to feel like, what we believe about ourselves and our potential. That's what I think is defining these apples. So our actions have an intention which defines these apples to them on the tree. And any branch that has a fulfillment of that particular intention or that fulfillment of that particular anticipation that we have will grow an apple. maybe of different size. And they show up as branches, as weights on the branches way out there in the future. And you can kind of get the sense from looking at this that the top branch has a lot more apples. So if we have a particular intention, like me meeting, I didn't intend to meet Dana in Paris, but I did intend to meet her in Greece, somewhere else. And that intention placed a lot of apples on the branch. Again, it wasn't like Greece or Paris was highlighted. It was more like her and I being in the same place anywhere in the world was highlighted. Even the possibility of talking on the phone by accident was highlighted. Any way in which we can connect was one of the apples. And those are defining, they're much more on the top branch. So let's say that's the branch where I go to Paris. And then if I continue, with the internal anticipation of, oh, I wish I had met her. I wish I could reach out to her. I keep trying to call her, whatever it is that sort of sets the intention. That puts me farther and farther along towards those apples. The apples are weighing down the branches and making those branches more likely. So in a sense, the final statement is the future pulls us towards what we intend. Not only what we intend, but what we act upon. There's this combination of having an intention that's hopefully conscious, not an undermining subconscious, like counter intention, but an intention that we act upon and do something about. That's what's going to bring about the step in the synchronicity. It's going to define the apples and bring about the synchronicity. So the meaningful event or synchronicity is at the branching points, where you see here. And that's going to be different. Either one of these branches could be meaningful, but one of them might be more meaningful than another based upon the weights out here. So let's look a little more in depth at how that works. So my colleague, who also works for the Synchronicity Institute and sends a lot of newsletters out, if you've got the newsletters, Jennifer Riddell-Carey, she invited me to go meet Dr. Csikszentmihalyi, Dr. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote the book Flow. And she didn't invite me to meet him. She invited me to come down and try to meet him. She lives in Claremont, and I live in the Bay Area. So it wasn't like we had a plan, but he was hosting a conference, or his department at Claremont University was hosting a conference. And we said, if we're going to meet him, it's going to be there. So I was on board. I bought a plane ticket. I flew down, and we went to this conference together. So here's how that goal of meeting Dr. Csikszentmihalyi unfolded. You can see these branches of the tree with apples on them. And I've laid it out here in a kind of precise way. There's every branch has like 6 little twigs on it, some of which have apples, some don't. But I'm going to actually calculate the numbers associated with the likelihood of a synchronicity here and show you how this meaningful selection part happens. This is the why would a certain outcome that's more meaningful show up in my life. So the first step was just attending the conference, right? If I'm going to meet Dr. Csikszentmihalyi, it's going to be because I went to the conference. That's by far the most likely. So this whole tree is that possibility. Just going to the conference is this first trunk of the tree. And if you look at the apples and you do a calculation and you say that, okay, there's 5 apples over here and 3 apples over here and 3 over here, 1 over here, and you add them up and you basically average them, take a weighted average, how many empty branches are there versus how many apple branches, you get a number. That number is 82%. The weight of the left-hand branch is 82% compared to 18 on the right. And so the question is, are we biasing a particular coincidence in that direction? Again, these apples correspond to some way in which Jennifer and I meet Dr. Csikszentmihalyi. That's the intention, right? Some kind of outcome where we feel fulfilled in our desire to connect with him. And there's an 82% chance of having that possibility simply because I went down to Claremont and was in that field. So the coincidence that we received is learning from the staff that he would stop by the conference at the end of the day. And Dr. Csikszentmihalyi was old. He actually died the following year, so it was the end of his life, and he was not feeling very well. So it was actually quite amazing that he decided to come by the conference to see his staff. So the coincidence was we learned from the staff that he would be there. So we hung out and we had a good time. We stayed around, and we trimmed off that right-hand branch. Do you see that? That's the key. So we go from many branches to fewer branches. One of them just drops away because we made a choice. And anytime we make a choice in our life, we are trimming off some possibilities. And we're expanding into other possibilities. Now the dark purple has to do with the weight. There's a lot of apples around an area. The branches are going to be dark purple. There's few branches around an area, it's going to be light. So you can see that the sort of lower section here is down here is the heaviest branch. And because Jennifer and I took proactive action, we decided to meet people and network. That was our proactive way of staying on top of the goal to meet Dr. Csikszentmihalyi. We didn't directly seek him out, but we just tried to meet people, find out who they knew and how they were doing and what they did for work, all that. So just the action of putting ourselves out there in alignment with our general intention to meet this great person also helped us meet other great people. That was aligned with the goal. And it set us up to be on the lower branch. And the lower branch has a mathematically, 8 apples out of 12 branches, 66% likelihood of having a coincidence happen. And so this coincidence here was bumping into familiar people. I know Jennifer met a couple of people that she knew from the wider community that she didn't know were going to be there. And those familiar faces were nice for us. We made friends. We hung out throughout the day. And they actually helped us, in the end, sort of find our way to Dr. Csikszentmihalyi, which I'll tell you now. So that was a coincidence which helped us. And we ended up on that bottom branch. Top branch disappears. We're trimming off the possibilities. We're starting from wholeness, starting from a whole tree and trimming as we go. What does not fit our intention? What does not fit our goal? What does not fit our mindset? If we didn't choose to take proactive action, we might have trimmed off the branches of the tree where there's lots of apples. Then we end up on a branch where there's few apples. That also happens. So here we're successfully trimming off the lighter branches, staying with the more intentional branches. And when we get to this point, many apples means good odds that your program will be successful. Oh, I changed the example. This should be many apples means good odds that meeting Dr. Csikszentmihalyi will be successful. So that's the step where we're at. And next we asked a friendly staff for an update, said, do you know when he's going to be here? If he's coming. And at this point we were friends with them and they said, yeah, he's going to be here in 10 minutes. So at that point we're at the end of the tree. We still hadn't met Dr. C, but we're so close to the possibility that there's 5 apples out of 6 branches. You can see that the likelihood has gone up. And we look at the odds. After defining goals and taking a step, we have certain odds, 51%. Just counting apples and counting branches. After the success, after one coincidence, we have 61%, and it goes to 71%. So over time, we just increase our odds. And I call this building momentum. And this is maybe the most important idea in the whole talk, okay? Right? Because as you learn in your life what kind of momentum you're building and what kinds of actions you're building with, then you can start to see how the opportunities that come to you are reflecting the momentum that you're building. Hopefully. Maybe you can't always see that. Maybe it's not always true, but there's a sense in which statistically you start to see the connection between, oh, we found out when Dr. C was going to be there because we talked to somebody earlier when we were networking, made friends. Start to see those connections. And it empowers us. If we're working on a project or a relationship or a goal, personal health goal, whatever goal we have, conscious or not, over time we're going to build momentum towards a certain outcome. And we might not think that we're even close to it. But like these apples, if you're over here, if I'm right here at the branch right here, I might feel like I'm just far away from my goals, right? I've worked for years, I'm never going to achieve this. But you're only one step away from 5 apples. It's the key takeaway is you can't see how the world is ready for you until it happens. Things click and you have that connection. But you're just a step away. When I was at the Louvre Museum, at one point I was just a step away from Dana. But if I was in a mood of like, I'm never going to see Dana, this is so frustrating, I got to just go leave the museum and go back to the airport, then I would have missed it. So key element here is staying the course, trusting that everything you do is building momentum towards your intention, towards what you're anticipating. If you keep building it, you will have apples start to fall into your lap of some kind. Now, it's important to notice them when they happen. You're not always going to recognize the positive outcome, but that's the idea of momentum. So build momentum on the tree. Now, there's another possibility. If Jennifer offers to help me get to Claremont and I say no, this is where the diagram is not necessarily super accurate, but gets the idea across. I go on this other branch and you can see there's only a few apples. So when we turn down offers of help or turn down potential synchronicities, we get farther away from those goals. So the question really shows up for me is like, how do we recognize those moments? How do we recognize those moments in our lives when there's sort of key junctures in what we decide is going to be closer or farther away from what we want? It's not always clear. Sometimes it seems like right now, I'm really excited because at sort of a key juncture for me, my daughter has a lack of a teacher in her physics classroom. And after 15 years of not being in the classroom, I applied to be her teacher. So it's like this amazing moment of synchronicity where it's, in some sense, I'm worried it's pulling me away from research and being an author. But in my gut, I know that it's not. It's leading me closer to my authentic self, which includes all of that. So we don't always know what choices are going to lead us where. We have to look inside for something, some kind of guidance, some gut instinct. And the key thing I think we should look for are filters. That's what we're going to talk about next. So again, fewer apples means weakened odds of reaching the goal. And the idea here would be like, so Mr. Csikszentmihalyi was going to come, but because we don't make any effort to connect and network, a family emergency comes up, his health doesn't go well, he doesn't come. I've certainly had that happen where things just don't materialize. So the idea is to build the momentum and do whatever you can in your own court to build that momentum for yourself. Don't worry about what others are thinking or doing or what you know is going to work. Just focus on what your intention is, what you can do. So this is the synchronicity tree. I'm not going to go deeply into it, but I'm just going to share with you that it's the way in which our future possibilities, we start in the trunk of the tree, and our future possibilities evolve in front of us. And they circle back through the outer rim. See how those branches actually connected to the roots. And so each choice we make in the future circles back to the next moment's past and becomes the next moment. And even when we choose that next moment, that root of the tree, the next moment, we're actually defining where it came from. The entire history that led to that point becomes defined retroactively. So this synchronicity helps us visualize the retroactive nature of the world. As we make choices, the world is able to respond through each route we choose, tells us what path we've been on and where and how people are going to show up into our lives. So let's pause for just a moment. Take stock of where we are and give you a sense of what we're going to do. It's 45 minutes in. I'm going to talk for another 15 minutes of ideas, and then, or less than that, hopefully. And then do an exercise on filters that gets you thinking about what stops you from seeing synchronicity in your life. Okay. So we talked about how synchronicity can happen. That's the retroactive determination. And we saw the light traveling and then sort of backing up and trying a different path. And then we talked about how. That's the apples weighing down the branches, making one path more likely than another. Now we're going to talk about how do you see it in your life more. So one suggestion I'd like to make is that emotional triggers or signals in the world around you in your life can be a way onto a synchronicity path. It can be a way for you to notice a really clear flag to say, oh, I'm having an experience right now that's very significant. What's the synchronicity here? How do I find it? So if you experience a trigger or tension, that's the first alarm clock for you to notice what you're feeling in your body, what you're feeling in your emotions, what you're thinking about in that moment. And I'm going to give you 3 tools: the synchronicity cycle, how these events can show up to help us grow and learn about ourselves; the Lorax process, which is an acronym for noticing synchronicity; and then naming your filter, practice for actually identifying how you're looking at the situation that might be specific to you. So the first step is the synchronicity cycle, or synchronicity as a process of healing. And the first step is just that you have some kind of hidden feeling come up. There's a filter, and that means that you're seeing the world through a certain lens. I'll just give an example. My daughter, I took my daughter to a concert on Sunday night, her like heartthrob favorite band. And I didn't quite know what I was getting myself into. We came back the next day and she said she was not feeling well in the morning, so she stayed home from school. I picked her up from school and she said she wanted to come. We dropped her off at school and she called us to come home early. And I said, well, it's too bad you're sick, but that's fine. We want you to get healthy. And she said, I'm not sick. I said, well, why are you coming home? She said, well, I just kind of overwhelmed by how cool the concert was. And I was like, that's not a reason to come home. But I had a filter going for me of how I was perceiving her choice, what she was saying. And that was and I had a hidden feeling in there of like maybe some concern for her, some irritation that I felt, misled, and some kind of feeling around what I wanted her to get out of school and how I wanted her to take responsibility for her, her choice to go to the concert. So there was this hidden feeling, and I chose to react unconsciously. I did a pretty good job actually of being conscious, but my unconscious action was like telling her what to do, telling her this is how you need to see things. As a dad, is what I'm going to say. But my action intensifies the dynamic, right? When we act out of unconscious reaction, sometimes it makes things more intense. It gets up against someone else's filters and we butt heads. So even as life gets more intense in step 3, our desire for peace and love and connection also intensifies. And that activates even more anticipation of something to be healed. So the more hurt we get by our interactions, in my experience, the more I want to find a different way of doing things. And so in step 5, we anticipate circumstances which will heal us. This is the synchronicity part. We're anticipating, bring me some opportunity to change this situation. And then the synchronicity emerges, but it might not be what we expect. It might be another situation where my daughter, mystifies me, misleads me, and I have to decide, how am I going to respond this time? Different situation, same underlying meaning for me. So look at your life, look at situations in your life where you have the same underlying meaning, even though the person or the context is different. That's what this is about. How does life circle? How does time circle back on itself to give us these repeated experiences? And if each time you go through this cycle, you learn something about yourself, learn how you're seeing the world, what you're reacting to in yourself, then at some point you might be able to react differently. You get to the new trigger, you have some filter up here, the hidden feeling. You say, I realize I'm feeling taken advantage of by my daughter, and I'm not going to let that get the control of me. I'm going to see what's best for her. How do I set a boundary with her? All sorts of other choices I can make besides just reacting. And I choose differently. And I leave the cycle. So the synchronicity cycle is the way synchronicity shows up to help us break the cycles of repetition in our lives, cycles of frustration or whatever we're perpetuating. So that's the synchronicity cycle. I'm going to skip the Lorax process. There's a process in my first book, Living in Flow, that we can maybe come back to if there's a question about it. I want to talk about filters and get to the exercise. So a filter, what does a filter do? I said in the description of this talk, we're going to talk about wholeness. We'll get to that. But if the world is one whole connected system, a filter is our way of interpreting that system, of interacting with the world. What I want to get at here for you, and I invite you to practice this with me, is you're going to come to a really short statement of you and how you see a certain situation. So this is a statement of truth, what feels like truth for you. The purpose of your filter in your mind might be to subconsciously avoid feeling something you don't want to feel. Like with my daughter, I might have had a filter of, I'm assuming that she's wants to go home because she's sick, and she just has a different motivation. And my filter might be, I haven't really processed it, but we'll come back to that. The idea is when we notice the filter, we allow ourselves to feel the underlying feeling, we can heal that feeling. Maybe get the chance to feel it more deeply and heal it. So that's the intention here. Doesn't necessarily mean it works in the same way every time, but what is a filter? It's simply the thoughts, feelings, and body sensations that color your experience. So thoughts and beliefs are kind of the same thing. Thoughts, feelings, and sensations. And some examples of filters that you might come to, or other people have come to. I feel attacked when people prejudge me. I have to be vigilant. I have to guess what people want from me. People don't want to hear from me. I have to be different to be successful. I need others to agree with me in order to feel legitimate. These are just really simple statements that for certain people that wrote these down have been true. One of them specifically was very true for me. People don't want to hear from me. That's one I've really struggled with for a long time. Because the way I grew up, in a big household with four siblings, 2 parents, and busy working parents, and going to school with people who were maybe critiquing me and that kind of thing. I sort of got this message that people don't really want to hear from me. And it underlies a lot of choices that I make in terms of how I show up. But by noticing that, what I did was I looked at a certain situation where that was happening. I was feeling kind of scared to show up in a situation. I noticed the thoughts I was having. Why was I scared to show up? The feelings I was having around the sadness or fear. And then noticing the body sensations, like when I feel like people don't want to hear from me, I sort of get tight in my chest. And all those 3 together let me see, like, oh yeah, basically I feel like people don't want to hear from me. Okay, I get that now. And it was such a key insight into my own psyche, that, and my body too, that it's true in many, many situations. And to circle back to synchronicity, this is where we might miss a synchronicity. If I believe that nobody wants to hear from me and I'm invited to give a talk, for instance, I might turn it down because of some small reason rather than taking a risk to say yes. So synchronicities are going to be more readily available to us if we are able to see past our filters, not get stuck in them. Thumbs up on that? So we'll dive into this right now. What I'd like you to do, if you're willing, is just take some notes and take some time to yourself while we do this to think about some situation in your own life. A filter is going to be something that's a belief about the world and how you should respond to it. And I invite you to remove specifics that generate the emotion, remove the charge of somebody's fault, but just looking at an observation of our lives. We're not going to reframe it yet. So here's the practice. And we have how much time? We have about 10 minutes for this or less. So this is called naming your filter. Naming your filter helps you see other choices that you have and maybe more synchronicities. So notice a time recently where you felt some tension. Could be an interaction with a person. Could be time by yourself. Dealing with your computer. Critiquing yourself for not being talented enough at fixing your computer or not taking good enough care of your cat. Or not earning enough money. Or not being honest with a friend. Or having a conflict. It's anything you felt tension about. And probably this is something that has happened before. If you felt some charge around it, it's probably a repeat of a situation that happens for a reason in your life. Notice when this has happened before. And identify what you're thinking about in that moment. Try to put yourself in that moment. Breathe into it. What are the thoughts in your head? This stuff is too hard. This person doesn't understand me. I never get it right. List a few thoughts that go with this experience for you. When you're ready, go on to feelings. Notice feelings in your body, in your chest, or wherever you feel them. Emotions. There's a few examples on the screen. And it's really helpful if you can re-experience this situation in your body so that you know what you're thinking, you feel the feelings a little bit. You notice the physical sensations that you're having. Maybe your shoulders are tight. Maybe your skin is prickly. Your legs are shaky. Your head hurts. Whatever your physical sensations are. So your thoughts, your feelings, and your sensations work together to tell you what to do with your situation, right? And your physical sensations are really helpful because they're like this key that you can use to notice, there's something going on for me. This is a moment when I want to drop in and figure out if I have a filter activated. So I'm feeling tense, feeling shaky, feeling headachy. And can you name the filter? With the thoughts and the feelings and the body, can you name what it is you're experiencing or thinking or believing? I have to X. People are Y. Put some examples on the screen. They have to be perfect to succeed. Just some ideas. So what I'd like to do next is if there's a person that would like to open up their microphone and share what they're working with here for everyone to hear and practice, you can take a volunteer. Maybe use the hand raising button. It's on the pan. Great. Thank you for joining on Mike. And yeah.
This
Welcome.
is great,
Good to see you.
Sky. I love this. Yeah. So
What's your tension situation?
So the tension situation comes from I have to wait. That yeah, I have to wait. Somebody said they're going to do something at a certain time, and now I have to wait. Yeah. So at the title, I put the title in first, waiting for someone else. And the thoughts are, oh, I'll just play solitaire. I just have to wait. It's never my turn. The feelings are downcast, a tight chest, and a sense of resentment and anxiety and regret. But underneath it all is sad.
Anxiety and regret.
Mm-hmm.
I heard you say it's never my turn. That was a thought. It sounds very much like a filter.
It could, yeah, well-being. The observation was 5 kids, 2 parents, 4 Leos, and it's never my turn to talk at dinner.
So when you're waiting for someone, you have a feeling of anxiety, of regret, thought of, I'll just keep myself occupied with solitaire.
Yeah.
And you have this overall, what was your body tension in your shoulders? What was it?
Yeah, the physical sensations are tension at my shoulders and a bit of anxiety in this chakra here.
In the chest.
Yeah.
And if you say to yourself, it's never my turn, do you feel those sensations in your body? Those emotions?
I do. And then I feel like, no, I'm not going to do that.
So,
no, I'm not going to do that.
So
it's my choice.
What's amazing, but it sounds like if you know that you've hit the right name, when you say it to yourself, you have those feelings. It's so true for you. It sounds like that's the case.
Yeah, and vice versa. I have those feelings because,
right, vice versa. So when you have an experience that makes you feel like it's never your turn, you have those chest tightness and anxiety and those things.
If I'm not successful, I'm taking my turn anyway. But it's one of those things that show up a lot and that kind of, I think, have an impact far greater than the way I actually put it out in my life.
And so this this has happened to you from childhood. You traced it way back to your way your family dynamic was set up with lots of people. And so this is really valuable. And hopefully folks can see that the global sense in which for you, Pan, it sounds like it's never my turn, speaks much more broadly than that one moment. And maybe you iron out what's going on for you in other parts of your life.
Indeed. And I also want to just say to Karen, yeah, you're right on. Thank you.
I'm missing the chat.
Yeah.
So Juliet, I'm going to give you the warning. We're just about ready to do breakout groups. I think it'd be nice if folks can get a chance to talk about this, if they learned anything from this exercise about themselves, get to know each other. So it's about 5:34. Do about 9 minutes, breakout rooms.
Yep.
I'm
ready to go. People have 3 people per room.
Yeah.
Maybe one room of 2, but basically after 8 minutes, you'll get a 60-second pop-up clock running that give people 1 minute to wrap up. So if everybody talks for about 2 minutes.
You can always come back here if you're done early.
Yeah, and I'll stay in the main waiting room in case you need to come back if you're done early.
And the prompt is you can even just walk through this exercise from the beginning to end if you're not done. Where have you felt tension? Where's this happened before? Thoughts, feelings, sensations, and try to name your filter. If you can come away with a named filter, that'd be great. And get to know each other. Okay, go. Well, most people. Okay. So what I'd like to do is stand up, take a little stretch myself, and hear from you all if there's anything you want to share from that conversation, or is any synchronicity story or question you have. We'll do some Q&A so we have a chance to loosen up and have the dialogue. So do you want to Juliet, do questions in the chat, or have people can unmute and just raise their hands, I think. Yeah,
we're a small enough group at this point. If you know how to hover your mouse over the bottom, you get a menu bar, and under reactions, you can raise your hand. You can also put up a heart or a smiley face or a party hat and some things to kind of support other people speaking. But at this point, if you'd like to ask a question, you can try waving at the camera, but we may not have you up on screen. So using the reactions button and clicking on raise hand is the most reliable. So yeah, if anybody wants to share.
I'm going to finish up a couple of key ideas here that I think people will like.
Then we'll go to that. Okay. You can find it if you think you'll want to share in a minute.
Yeah. I want to make sure we leave plenty of space and time for Q&A, but we got more to share if you want. So I want to circle back and close with this piece about wholeness. We live in a holistic universe. That's the research I do in physics, showing that timeline is a whole stretch, not just a single moment, a string of moments, but a whole stretch of time that is one connected thing for us. And so the question that arises for me is not how do we get something from nothing, but how do we get something from everything? How do we think of the world as a garden that we're pruning, like that tree of possibilities that we're trimming off the branches, versus something we have to invest in and work hard to make grow. A garden grows on its own. It grows from the sunshine, from the rain, and it's our job as gardeners to tend it and pull out what's not working and encourage what is working. And that's different from feeling like we have to lift every rock ourselves and place everything in place and make everything do its work. It's less when we get our filters stopping us from acting on in our lives. When we see our filters in action, we can get around them or notice them and not be controlled by them. It allows us to be more easeful, in my experience, more easeful with how we navigate choices, more like a garden where we're carving away from reality, from wholeness, versus trying to add stuff to nothingness. So that's the difference here. Are we carving away from wholeness? Or are we adding to nothingness? I suggest carving away as a way of flow. and for that. So carving away is actually the way the universe works with rainbows. A rainbow is beautiful because of what is not there. You have a rainbow which is made from white light from the sun streaming across the sky, hitting clouds and bouncing off and refracting and reflecting to our eyes. And the colors you see, like red, is actually white light minus the blue and minus the yellow. Mm-hmm. So you're seeing wholeness with certain elements subtracted. Just like when you're on this tree of possibilities that we saw before, a branching tree, you're on one branch out of many. The whole tree exists in possibility space, but you yourself are having one experience that is a smaller version of that, a filtered version of that. So a rainbow is beautiful because of what is not there, not because of what we add to it, because of what we take away from the wholeness. We ourselves are similar. We are beings of whole potential, and we slowly make decisions which carve away who we want ourselves to be, who we don't want ourselves to be. And we can change that. We can make different decisions to become more invested in family, become more serious about work, become more aware of important issues like social justice and climate change, or whatever is important to us at this time in our lives. It's possible to carve away new things and reveal other hidden possibilities. So from this space, a new question arises for when we're solving problems in our lives. What can you remove to reveal a solution? Not what can you think up to cleverly solve something and add more problems in the future. What can you remove that reveals a natural solution to your collective problem? So I'd like to leave it there for now. Let's see the chat. Are there any questions from folks? Anything you want to go into more deeply? Julia, if you could save the chat. I think I cleared my chat when I logged out earlier. Love to read the comments before.
Sure, glad to.
You know, I skipped over holograms. Do you all want to hear about holograms? I'll do that. I want to leave enough time for Q&A, but I think holograms are called for. So I can get my window. Here we go. Okay. So holograms are an example of a technology built around wholeness, the wholeness of the universe. I'm just backing up a little bit. So the research I do has some examples that are holistic. And the idea here is that synchronicity comes from the whole universe. When I ran into Dana at the Louvre Museum, it was the whole universe. It was Greece and Israel and Paris that were all responding to my need to meet her. The buses and the airplanes that got us where we were, all that was part of this whole system. So how's it possible to have a system that's holistic and responds as a whole to our choices? Well, there's some examples in the technical world. Digital photography is one of them. And it's pretty cool. So if you have a picture on the left, this is actually kind of how the brain works too. It's a little more subtle and complicated, but the basic same ideas. You have a map of, what I'm going to call the territory, which is a picture of the city. This is like the real world, any kind of physical, spatial picture. This is your living room. This is your drive to work, some kind of territory. Well, it turns out it can be represented by a map in what we call the frequency space. You use a mathematical thing called the Fourier transform. Fourier transform, by the way, is the most beautiful mathematics there is, in my opinion. It's so beautiful. And I came to learn about it through music. You can see any musical signal can be decomposed into its Fourier frequency components, which allows you to manipulate your MP3s and audio files to make them enhanced or high end, go up or down. Frequency, what's it called? Equalizer, graphic equalizer. It's all the same mathematics. With pictures, and you've seen this maybe with AI, artificial intelligence decoding and finding faces, facial recognition, things like that. They take the territory on the left here and convert it into frequencies on the right. And every dot, every pixel on this screen on the right in the map corresponds to a specific frequency of oscillation across the screen. It's a little more complicated than we can get into in a short time, but these two things are equivalent. This picture on the right, the map, can be converted back into the image on the left, territory, just by computer code. So it's an encoding of the patterns or frequencies. Well, here's what you can do with it. And anybody who's ever used Snapchat or Instagram, may not be most of us, but you've used filters of some kind on your phones or devices. And this is called a low pass filter. It's removing the outer regions of the map. Notice what it did to the territory. It blurred the picture. But here's the key idea. Here's what I want you to take away. Not that, you can apply a filter to your images on your phone, but that you can affect the entire image through one change. Okay, I made one change by telling it to erase the outer regions of the map, and it affected the entire territory. If the world is like this, if the world is holistic, as I've shown with light in my work and earlier in the talk today, then changes we make in one frequency affect everything in the world. We're speaking pretty metaphorically right now, and I'm going to leave it as a metaphor, but it's a powerful metaphor. If you change one thing in your mindset, that's the map. You change the map, one thing, it affects the entire territory. Here's a very tight low-pass filter, blurs everything. So maybe you're the kind of person that sees everything through broad strokes. It's kind of like me. I miss the details. I see the big connections. That's the low-pass filter. But sometimes I want to, like my wife is the opposite, right? So I want to learn to be a little bit more like her. I just need to apply a high-pass filter, learn how to do that. Get rid of that inner section. Metaphorically, that means changing maybe my filter around. I've got a filter that says, I've got to rush through this. If I have to rush through this, I'm not going to do a good job cleaning the kitchen and doing the dishes. And so I'm going to come back later and my wife's going to be like, why did you not finish? Why is there a bowl still on the counter? Well, because I have a low pass filter. And I'm just seeing the big picture. It looks pretty good to me. We can make our next meal. The details are missing. My wife, on the other hand, has a high pass filter like this one, where in the middle section of the map is gone, leaving only the edges and the details visible. So you can see this image of the buildings is, as a whole, it is affected by this change. This is the key here, this idea that you can make one change to a representation of the map and it affects the whole territory. So for me, what I've taken away, and maybe this is something that will apply to you too, I don't know. When I make a change to one of my filters, when I see that, I feel like I have to get this done fast. Whatever the task is, I always have to get it done fast. If I heal whatever's behind that, if I value myself no matter what I accomplish, because there's some kind of feeling there around value and accomplishment. But if I value myself no matter what, I might work slowly, get less done, but do it better. And I'll change my filter, change this mapping here. It allows me to see the world through different lens, see it more like my wife, for instance, when I need to. Gives me more spectrum, more range of options. And more synchronicities can unfold when I'm not pushing them away because I'm limited in my view. So that's where the holism of the cosmos really, I think, can be applied here in an amazing way. And to give you a picture of a hologram, this is the distinction here. This is a picture of the city on a 2D iPad. It's flat, has no actual depth to it. Here's a hologram. It looks like a real city. When you turn it around, you can see the things moving past each other, like they're real statues. But when they pick it up, you'll see it's an illusion. It's a flat piece of film. It creates the image of a city there for you. And in the same way, I think my work has shown to some extent that the underlying encoding of the cosmos creates the appearance of our reality, and how we interpret it becomes important in how it unfolds after that. But it's an appearance. It's not actually there until we actually observe it. This is well known in physics. The reality is not there until we observe it. And so there's this connection to holograms, which is pretty cool. And sort of the takeaway from this, I know we're getting close to time. We're all looking at this hologram from different angles. We're all looking at the same hologram, but we're seeing it from different angles. And I would say, if I'm on the left, I would say the triangle's in front of building X. You would say, if you're looking at the middle, the triangle's over building Y. And the third person would say the triangle's over building Z on the right. Depending on how we look, things are going to look different in their perspective if we have a holographic universe. And it's important to see your filter in play and step back from it and understand that everybody's got a filter to contribute as part of the wholeness that we all are creating together.
Great. And I saw from the chat, we had one question or comment from Chris Mackey. Maybe want to maybe close out before we get to the very end.
Great.
Hi, Sky. Terrific talk. Complicated things you make really clear. I'm really interested with how you emphasize filters and the impact on people's well-being, because in psychology, there's this approach of schemas where we look at the main patterns that color people's perceptions. So people can have an abandonment schema, or for myself, it's more an unrelenting standard schema, perfectionism. It could be self-sacrifice or things like that. So, yeah, look, I wonder if you've heard of the notion of schema therapy, because what you're doing is just a really good explanation of how schemas work in psychology.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. You know, what I'm interested in a lot is the brain. And there's so much of the same mathematics in the brain. And we're pattern-based organisms, right? So everything we know is coming in through our senses as a pattern that gets translated, I think, through a Fourier transform into our nervous system and remains to some extent there through the various processes. And so everything else that comes in, new information, is being matched against that old information, either resonating and highlighting it or not. So we can't even recognize things that don't make sense to us if we've never seen them before. And on the flip side, if you use a certain word pattern that I associate with, you know, someone who wasn't nice to me in the past, I'm going to respond in a very different way than someone else will. So pattern recognition is a big part of our internal schema, and schema is a great word for that. I'd love to learn more.
Thank you. That wonderful talk.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's great. Thank you for your work as well. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you being here. And if you want to find out more about my work and what we're doing at the Synchronicity Institute, go to synchronicityinstitute.com. Check out the books I've written, and love to hear from you on the newsletter. And we have a course called the Living in Flow course, which is free to folks in the newsletter. So lots of tools and activities you can do there to hopefully help you embody this stuff more.
Thank you so much,
Sky.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Really,
And then in the chat, I also dropped our link for the coincidenceproject.net. And I hope you're all on the email list, or if the first time you visit the website, you should get a pop-up, or you scroll down the homepage to sign up for the email list. Our next event will be October, I think it's the 16th, the third Saturday of each month. We have Coincidence Cafe. And that's a chance to, there's a little more emphasis on the breakout group times and the group discussion times. And then we'll have our next speaker series, like tonight, with Jess Price Jones on October the 4th, and we do those once a month as well. All those events are on our participate page on the website, and I hope we'll get to see all of you again at future events. And we're so grateful to Sky for joining us and sharing these wonderful talks.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. See you later.
Thank you, everyone.